Hey guys, Wolverine here with a video on Sidelane Outer Towers and why they should actually almost never be taken. In this game, we have Cloud9 versus Golden Guardians in the spring split of 2020 LCS, where Cloud9 is about to pull off a pretty devastating play with their Pantheon Talia combo. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen this game, it does not go well for the Golden Guardians. And after C9 kill everyone, they do decide to stay bot lane and take this tower with their Rift Herald, which is a pretty standard play across every region. However, what we're going to be going into is why this is actually the incorrect play, and how Cloud9 could have snowballed their lead better. Now, as we see the turret about to go down, we do notice a large amount of minions pulling, which will go into the Aphelios, which key can turn into a permafreeze that will hold until Cloud9 come to break it. Now, with Cloud9's lead, they do have the ability to do that, but by the time they reset and send multiple members bot, they will have lost 3 to 4 waves to that freeze, which is only one of the reasons why taking this tower is bad. But we'll go more into that later. What we're going to do now is look at the game state after this tower is taken. Before we can actually analyze that though, we need to understand how towers shape the map, because towers essentially act as impassable terrain for enemy champions and minions. So at the start of the game, the map for blue side will look like this, since all their outer towers are up. Now, this is obviously a very spread out map state, which is fine to play in the early game, but as the game progresses, we'll see more items come in, more champion levels, and dives will be more frequent. Suddenly, this map state becomes harder to play. However, after those dives, generally the towers will be taken, so the map state will start to look like this. Now, if you're playing a very hyper early game team composition and you're trying to accelerate, this is actually very bad for you. This is hard to accelerate on. Vice versa, if you're the team trying to make back your early game deficit, maybe scale into the mid or late game, this is very good for you. You're very glad that these towers went down, because this is actually a very easy formation to hold, because these tier 2 towers are very strong. They're very hard to dive. It's hard for the enemy team to actually accelerate the game on you in this position. You can have tier 2 freezes occur in front of your towers, either intentionally or unintentionally, since a team being strong enough to kill a tier 1 tower does not necessarily mean that that team is strong enough to actually extend all the way into the lane and make sure that the wave crashes to the tier 2 tower. And all of this is actually made worse by this mid lane tier 1 tower being up. Mid lane towers affect the shape of the map more than any, and mid lane tier 1 is incredibly important. There are entire compositions built around trying to hold this tower as long as possible, because not being able to be pushed back past this line gives you control over the center of the map, which obviously extends into your jungle and side lanes. It makes these tier 2s harder to dive, the tier 2 freezes harder to break, you have more control over your jungle camps. So this is why, generally, this will be the next objective for a team. And just as a disclaimer, everything I say in this entire video is factor dependent. Nothing in League of Legends is absolute. Every concept is dependent on the champions, the items, the game state, etc. But in general, this tower going down means that your defensive formation is now weaker, you have less control over your jungle camps, your tier 2s are more susceptible to dive, tier 2 freezes are easier to break, but this is still a fine formation. Actually, you still have good distance to the Baron, although the tier 1 gives you very good distance to the Baron, but in general, this is still a fine state to play out. You only really get into trouble when these tier 2s start going down, and then you're forced into your base, and now your distance to Baron is very far. You have almost no control over your jungle, no way to actually get any vision in anywhere notable. But the problem that occurs for hyper early game compositions is that these formations are so difficult to break that by the time these towers actually go down, the enemy team has already made back their deficit, they've scaled, and they can just straight team fight you at the Baron, at the Dragon, anywhere they want, regardless of the state of their towers. This is why we've seen a shift to more mid-game compositions, more late-game compositions, especially at higher levels of play. League of Legends is simply not set up for this formation to be broken easily. Like there's just not enough ways. But what we're going to be looking at is if these early game compositions didn't take these tier 1 towers, or really if any composition didn't. Now, as we said earlier, this is a very spread out map state. And the problem with a spread out map state is the more spread out you are, the harder it is to defend. A team is obligated to defend all of their outer towers, and if you look at the side lane outer towers, they are not only very far up, but they are very far apart from each other. And this makes them very difficult to actually defend. Now, when you take into account that you have an early game deficit, or the enemy team has better early game champions than you, it gets very difficult. And there's a lot of times where these are simply impossible to defend them both. And an example of this is obviously the Cloud9 game, which we'll look at. Now, if we set the lanes back to standard just for simplicity, and we assume that this bot lane tier 1 tower hasn't been taken, we can look at the map state, and we can say that if you're Cloud9, if you're trying to accelerate this game, you're looking to either deny minion waves and or get kills. Now, the best way to do that is either freezes or dives. But if we look at top lane and we look at Pantheon going for a dive onto the Aatrox, obviously if Sejuani is there, it can't occur. Vice versa, if Pantheon goes bot and Sejuani is there to cover it, it can't occur. Now, the problem for the Sejuani is Pantheon can effectively be both bot and top at the same time with his ultimate. So if Pantheon ever has any information on where Sejuani is, he can simply go to the opposite side. But even regardless of a Pantheon pick, if you simply have information of the enemy jungle and you're able to get to top before they are and force their top laner off the tower, you can now stay top in their top lane jungle and farm camps while holding Aatrox off of his own tower, and waves will continue to crash and he will be denying them. Now, this creates a situation where Cloud9 or Golden Guardians has to respond, right? They simply can't leave their Aatrox losing wave after wave. They have to create a place somewhere. Now, Sejuani has a lot of options. One of those is to try and get Aatrox back to his tower. The problem is that now that Aatrox is off his tower, Set can simply posture forward, and they can take the 2v2 between the towers, which Cloud9 obviously wins. So, in this situation, Golden Guardians would need to have a third member to come up to make this feasible. Now, if Zoe came over, the problem is Taliyah has Prio and her ultimate, so she would be there at the same time, if not sooner, and again, Cloud9 win this 3v3. Alternatively, Taliyah could go bot lane, force Aphelios and Nautilus off of their tower, while Pantheon and Set simply back away. So whichever way you slice it, Golden Guardians does not have a way to defend both of these towers. So their only option at this point is to try to make a play elsewhere on the map. If Sejuani comes bot lane and tries to force Syndra and Pyke off their tower, she's creating a similar situation with the Aatrox and Set in the top lane. However, with both top laners having TP and Taliyah having both Prio and her ultimate, Golden Guardians probably don't win this 4v4 if they elect to dive. Now, Syndra and Pyke are also very weak champions at repelling dives, so if you had a different 2v2, different bot laners, this could become that much more difficult, to the point where it's just not possible. There are a lot of situations where you both can't defend your outer towers and you can't do the same on the opposite side. So at this point, Golden Guardians' only real response is to try to create a freeze in the bot lane, which is very similar to what C9 would be doing in top lane. If Aphelios and Nautilus are able to create a freeze, or preferably a permafreeze, Sejuani can hover bot lane and threaten to kill Syndra and Pyke if they walk up to the freeze, and they would be denying waves in the same way that Aatrox is being denied waves. This essentially creates a split map with two objectives, one being the freeze in bot lane for Golden Guardians, and the other being the top lane tower for Cloud9 that will be denying waves to the Aatrox. Unfortunately for Golden Guardians, with Talia having both Cryo in mid and her ultimate, she can probably come break this, and if Zoe tries to come down and make this a 4v4, Pantheon can probably get there at the same time with his ultimate. Obviously the TPs can come in, but a 5v5 is obviously advantageous for Cloud9. So as we can see, there's not really a good response for Golden Guardians if these tier 1s are left up. As opposed to if they were taken by Cloud9, Golden Guardians could simply try to turtle behind their tier 2s, set up freezes when they could, and try to make back their deficit or find a way back into the game. If they could win from here, probably not, because their composition is just straight up not very good. But it's a much better position because the point is that they're much closer together. It's much easier to defend each other. You're not being pushed off these tier 2 towers very easily. If you keep these up, you force the losing team to extend onto the map where you can make more plays. And this is going to continue to affect them come mid-game. Let's say even, in NA, the classic NARAM, let's say all 5 champions are just kind of chilling. Maybe there's a dragon, maybe there's a tower, who knows. There will still be waves that do come to these towers throughout the entire game. So regardless of where champions are, even if the map is very fluid at this point and we're not in standard lanes, Golden Guardians will still be required to send members up to answer these waves to try and collect this golden XP. I mean, if they don't, they obviously just lose out on that and will accrue disadvantages through that. So the next time you're watching a pro game or any high level game, look at the losing team, the team with the gold deficit, the team like getting pushed in, and ask yourself if their tier 1s were up, would they be able to actually come up to them to collect their waves? A lot of the time, the answer is just no. Essentially, playing with your tier 1 towers just makes the game more difficult because they don't really do anything but hurt you. Now, the same concept can be applied in tier 1 and tier 2 freezes. This is another way to force the team that is behind, the team with the gold deficit, the team with the weaker early game champions to extend themselves onto the map. Now, if Cloud9 weren't able to actually dive the Aatrox or the bot lane for Golden Guardians, they could simply try to set up a freeze in the top lane. Preferably, they would try to set up a permafreeze. And again, what this is doing, it's creating a situation that Golden Guardians has to respond to. Now, as we've seen, Golden Guardians does not have a lot of good responses, so what ends up happening is they just have to lose a lot of waves because they have the weaker early game champions, they are at a gold deficit at this point in the game, and it gets very bad for them. In the same way, if C9 loses tier 1 towers, they can freeze at their tier 2s, and Golden Guardians are forced to extend even farther. These are all the same concept, really. These are all essentially freezes. They're just ways to deny minions. The only difference is where they're actually located. Obviously, the closer to your base, the easier it is for you to execute, and the harder it is for the enemy to stop. A tier 2 freeze is obviously harder to break than a tier 1 freeze because it requires Golden Guardians to extend themselves farther onto the map. So the advantage to going farther up is you get more control. The closer to the enemy base you're running this type of play, the more control over the map you have. If you have a tier 1 freeze, obviously you have more prio than a tier 2 freeze. If you're running dives and forcing Golden Guardians off their towers, you have even more control where you can actually extend your vision line into the enemy jungle, take jungle camps, etc. Now, what you want to do is you want to go as far as possible. If your team can create dives and Golden Guardians does not have a response, then you want to create dives. If that is not possible, you want to go for tier 1 freezes. If that is not possible, you want to go to tier 2 freezes. And this brings me to my next point, which is that if you are even or behind, you still should not be taking these tier 1 towers because there are a lot of wave manipulation tactics that are only available if your tier 1 tower is down. If you're the Golden Guardians here, you do not want to take this because Cloud9 can now tier 2 freeze and it will be impossible for you to break this because you are already at a massive deficit. They can also create extended bounces. Um, Minions will just pool even if Cloud9 is actually not there tending to the wave manually. It's just not a good time for a very small amount of gold. And all of this is based around the concept of minion denial, which is the strongest strategy in all of League of Legends and is criminally underutilized. In a 30-minute game, 25,000 gold and 55,000 XP of minions will spawn. This is equivalent to 55 kills of gold and 92 kills of XP. For reference, a tower is worth 500 gold, so a tower is less valuable than a single kill or 2 minion waves if we're talking purely economically, and a tower with all 5 plates and first tower blood is equal to around 2 kills or 6 minion waves. I may end up going deeper into all the different scenarios and game states in which Tier 1 towers affect the game, and all the different wave manipulation tactics, but honestly, I've been trying to get this video out for like 6 months, so we are just gonna cut it here.